Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Accountant's Mask. Frank Morrison adjusted his reading glasses and stared at the spreadsheet glowing on his laptop screen. Numbers, columns, tax codes, the mundane armor he'd worn for 12 years. To everyone in Riverside Heights, he was just another suburban accountant who drove a sensible Honda and complained about property taxes at neighborhood barbecues. But beneath the polyester shirts and pocket protectors lived a ghost. Langley had called him the Shadow during his 15-year tenure with the CIA's Special Activities Division. He'd infiltrated terrorist cells in Kandahar, eliminated targets in Belgrade, and vanished into crowds like smoke. Then came a mission in Tehran that went sideways. 3 good agents dead because of faulty intelligence. Frank had extracted himself and disappeared into civilian life, carrying scars no one could see. He'd met Diana Kellerman at a coffee shop near George Washington University, where she was finishing her psychology degree. Beautiful, ambitious, with eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She claimed her parents died in a car crash when she was 20, leaving her alone in the world. Frank, tired of shadows and death, saw salvation in her vulnerability. Their wedding was small. Diana insisted on keeping it quiet. Just close friends, she'd said. Frank didn't question why none of her family attended. Love made him careless, and carelessness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Now, 12 years later, Frank sat in his home office listening to his wife's voice drift up from the kitchen below. She was on another late-night call, speaking in hushed tones. Lately, these calls have become frequent. The timing has to be perfect, Diana's voice carried through the heating vent. The Iranian sleeper cells will make it look like a car bomb. Then we split his $5 million life insurance policy. Frank's hand froze over the keyboard. The coffee mug beside him, decorated with world's best dad from their daughter Chloe, suddenly felt like a lead weight. Iranian sleeper cells. Life insurance. His life insurance. Every instinct honed by years of tradecraft screamed to life. Frank closed his laptop with surgical precision and moved to the window. Diana stood in the kitchen below. Phone pressed her ear, her free hand gesturing animatedly. The woman he'd shared a bed with for over a decade was planning his murder. He thought of 15-year-old Chloe, probably texting friends in her room, unaware her mother was orchestrating patricide. Or was she? In Frank's world, family meant nothing when survival was at stake. Trust was a commodity he could no longer afford. Diana hung up, and Frank watched her reflection in the kitchen window. No tears, no guilt, just the satisfied expression of someone who just completed a business transaction. She pulled out a bottle of wine and poured herself a generous glass, toasting her own reflection. Frank backed away from the window and opened his laptop again. But instead of spreadsheets, he accessed a partition hidden behind layers of encryption. Inside were the tools of his former life. Contact lists, safe house locations, weapon caches, and identities he'd maintained for emergencies. The Shadow was awake. Chapter 2, The Investigation. Frank arrived at his office the next morning carrying the same leather briefcase he'd used for years, but inside, beneath the tax forms and calculators, lay a Glock 19 and surveillance equipment worth more than most people's cars. Morrison and Associates Accounting occupied a modest suite above a sandwich shop. The perfect cover for a man who needed to appear ordinary while conducting extraordinary business. His secretary, Mrs. Patterson, greeted him with her usual efficiency. Your 9 a.m. appointment called to reschedule, and your wife phoned about dinner plans. What did she say exactly? Frank asked, hanging his coat with practiced calm. Something about trying that new Persian restaurant downtown. Said she had a surprise for you. Persian. The pieces were falling into place with chilling clarity. Once alone, Frank activated the white noise generator he'd disguised as a radio and began his investigation. Diana Morrison, birth name Diana Kellerman, had arrived in the United States 18 years ago on a student visa. Her backstory checked out on the surface, but Frank knew how to dig deeper. The car crash that killed her parents? It happened, but the victims were Harold and Margaret Kellerman from Tucson, Arizona. No children listed. Diana had stolen a dead girl's identity. Next, he traced her financial records. The psychology degree was real, but she'd never practiced. Instead, she'd received monthly payments from a consulting firm called Meridian Strategic Solutions. Frank ran the company through his databases. It was a front for the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service. His wife was a Russian operative. Frank leaned back in his chair, processing the revelation. For 12 years, he'd been married to the enemy. Diana had played the long game, infiltrating his life, bearing his child, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate him. But why now? He pulled up classified briefings he still had access to through carefully maintained back channels. 3 months ago, the CIA had begun Operation Nightfall, a deep-cover mission to identify and neutralize a Russian spy network operating on the East Coast. Frank wasn't officially involved, but Langley would want to debrief anyone who'd been married to a Russian asset for over a decade. Diana knew he was a former CIA operative. She had to, which meant everything. Their meeting, their marriage, Chloe's birth had been orchestrated. The question was, how much did their daughter know? Frank's secure phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Persian restaurant. Table 12. Come alone. D. He smiled grimly. Diana was accelerating her timeline. Good. Frank preferred his enemy's impatient. At 5 p.m., Frank drove to Shiraz Palace, an upscale Persian restaurant in downtown Richmond. He'd changed into a simple gray suit and carried a newspaper, the picture of suburban normalcy. But beneath his jacket, the Glock waited, and in his ear, a nearly invisible device recorded everything. Diana sat at table 12, wearing a black dress that accentuated her figure. She looked up as he approached, and Frank saw something new in her eyes, predatory anticipation. You look tense, honey, she said, gesturing for him to sit. Hard day with the numbers. The usual. Frank studied the menu, noting the restaurant's layout, exits, and potential threats. This is nice. What's the occasion? Can't a wife surprise her husband? Diana sipped her wine. I've been thinking about us lately. About changes. What kind of changes? Before Diana could answer, a man approached their table. Tall, dark hair, expensive suit, with the posture of someone accustomed to violence. Frank recognized the type, muscle with brains. Diana, darling. The man bent to kiss her cheek, his hand lingering on her shoulder. You must be Frank. I'm Tony Vasquez, Diana's business partner. Frank stood, offering his hand. Tony's grip was firm, testing. Business partner? Diana never mentioned. International consulting, Diana interrupted smoothly. Tony helps with overseas clients. Tony sat without invitation, signaling the waiter. Frank, Diana's told me so much about you. The quiet accountant who keeps everyone's secrets safe. The emphasis on secrets wasn't lost on Frank. This was a probing session, testing how much he knew, how much he suspected. Tony wasn't just muscle. He was Diana's handler. As the evening progressed, Frank played his role perfectly. The boring suburban husband, slightly uncomfortable with his wife's worldly colleague, asking harmless questions about their business. But he was cataloging everything. Tony's watch Omega Seamaster, favored by intelligence operatives, the slight bulge under his left armpit shoulder holster, the way he scanned the room every few minutes, operational awareness. When they parted ways, Diana kissed Frank's cheek and whispered, See you at home, darling. We need to talk. Frank drove home through surface streets, checking for surveillance. Clean, but as he pulled into his driveway, he noticed Chloe's bedroom light was off. His daughter never went to bed before midnight on weekends. Inside, Diana waited in the living room with 2 glasses of wine. Sit, she said, patting the couch beside her. Let's talk about our future. Frank sat, accepting the wine, but not drinking. What's on your mind? Honesty. Diana's mask slipped slightly. I know you've been investigating me, Frank. Or should I call you Shadow? The game was over. Chapter 3, The Reveal. Frank set down his wine glass with deliberate calm. I'm not sure what you mean. Diana laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Please, did you really think I wouldn't notice? The extra time at the office, the the questions about my past, the way you've been watching me. She stood, moving to the mantel where their wedding photos sat. 15 years with the CIA's Special Activities Division. 17 confirmed kills. The Tehran incident that made you disappear. Where's Chloe? Frank's voice carried a dangerous edge. Safe. For now. Diana turned, and Frank saw the woman he'd really married. Cold, calculating, lethal. She's with friends. This conversation is just between us. And Tony, my handler, yes. SVR has been planning this operation for 20 years. Find a burned American intelligence asset. Place an operative close to him. Create a life that makes him soft and complacent. Diana poured herself more wine. You were the perfect target, Frank. Traumatized, isolated, desperate for connection. Frank remained seated, hands folded. And our daughter? A happy accident that made the cover more convincing. Diana's casual dismissal of Chloe hit Frank like a physical blow. Though she's proven useful in other ways. Explain. Chloe isn't with friends, Frank. She's been recruited. 15 years old and already showing remarkable aptitude for the family business. Diana smiled. She's been reporting on you for 2 years. Every conversation, every habit, every weakness. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Frank had experienced in war. His own daughter, trained to spy on him, to help orchestrate his murder. But he kept his expression neutral, a skill that had kept him alive in hostile territory. The insurance policy? He asked. $5 million, split between your grieving widow and her business partner. But that's just the bonus. The real prize is Operation Nightfall. Your former colleagues think they're hunting Russian assets, but they're walking into a trap. Every agent they've assigned to the operation is already compromised. Frank processed this information. Diana wasn't just eliminating him. She was delivering a devastating blow to American intelligence operations. Dozens of agents would die. The Iranian sleeper cells you mentioned? A lovely touch, don't you think? Your death will be blamed on foreign terrorists, deflecting suspicion from the real perpetrators. Tony has contacts in several Middle Eastern organizations who owe favors. Diana moved closer, settling onto the coffee table directly in front of Frank. But here's what's really beautiful about this operation. You're going to help us. I don't think so. Oh, but you are. Diana produced a tablet, swiping to a video feed. Chloe sat in what appeared to be a basement, zip-tied to a chair. 2 armed men flanked her. 1 phone call, and your daughter dies. Badly. Tony has very specific tastes when it comes to interrogation. Frank felt the familiar coldness settle over him. The same emotional shutdown that had made him effective in the field. Personal feelings were a luxury he couldn't afford. Not when lives were at stake. What do you want? Tomorrow night, you're going to meet with Gregory Mitchell from the agency. He'll want to debrief you about your marriage to a Russian operative. You're going to give him a list of names, every deep cover asset you can remember from your time with the company. He'll trust you because you're the victim, the betrayed husband seeking redemption. Frank nodded slowly. And then you'll drive to the safe house where Mitchell's team is coordinating Operation Nightfall. You'll deliver this. Diana produced a briefcase from behind the couch. Inside is a device that will upload a virus to their secure network. It will feed us real-time intelligence on every anti-Russian operation the CIA is running. After that, you die in a tragic car bombing orchestrated by Iranian terrorists. I collect the insurance money and disappear with Tony. Chloe, well, that depends on how cooperative you are. Frank stood, moving to the window. Outside, their suburban street looked peaceful. Porch lights glowing, newspapers waiting on doorsteps, the American dream on display. But underneath, predators hunted. I need to think about this, he said. You have until tomorrow morning. If you try to run, if you contact anyone from your old life, if you do anything except exactly what I've told you, Chloe dies. Understood. Frank turned from the window. Understood. Diana kissed his cheek. The same gesture she'd made thousands of times during their marriage. Good boy. I'm going out for a while. Use the time to make peace with your choices. After she left, Frank sat in the darkness of his living room, thinking. Diana had made one crucial mistake in her revelation. She'd underestimated who she was dealing with. The shadow hadn't died in Tehran. He'd simply been sleeping. Now he was awake, and everyone who'd betrayed him would pay. Chapter 4. The Countergame. Frank waited 2 hours after Diana left before moving. He went to his study and removed several books from the shelf, revealing a hidden panel. Inside were items from his former life, fake IDs, encrypted phones, cash, and most importantly, a secure communication device that would let him contact his former handler without going through official channels. But first, he needed to locate Chloe. Frank had installed tracking devices in all the family vehicles years ago, a precaution from his paranoid past that now proved invaluable. Chloe's phone showed her last location as the Miller house 3 blocks away, where she often studied with her friend Amy. But the tracker in Diana's BMW showed a very different story. The car had traveled to an industrial area near the James River, perfect for the kind of off-the-books facility where someone might hold a hostage. Frank memorized the location, then activated his secure communicator. Blackbird came the voice after several encryption protocols engaged. This is Shadow. I need an immediate callback on the Tehran protocols. A pause. Shadow's been dark for 12 years. Authentication required. Frank provided a series of codes that proved his identity. Within minutes, Gregory Mitchell, his former CIA handler, was on the line. Jesus Christ, Frank. We heard rumors you were dead. Not yet, but there's a problem. Major problem. Frank quickly outlined Diana's true identity, the planned assassination, and the trap being set for Operation Nightfall. Son of a bitch, Mitchell breathed. We'll have an extraction team to you in. Negative. They have my daughter. I need this handled quietly, and I need resources. What kind of resources? The kind that don't officially exist. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. There's a storage unit in Mechanicsville. Unit 247. Everything you need is there. But Frank, if this goes sideways, the agency will disavow any involvement. Understood. One more thing. I need you to feed specific information to your Operation Nightfall team. Make them think they're being compromised through a different vector. I need Diana to believe her plan is working. After disconnecting, Frank drove to the storage unit. Inside, wrapped in plastic and oilcloth, waited the tools of his former trade. Weapons, surveillance equipment, explosives, and most importantly, items that could make this look like anything other than CIA involvement. He spent the next 3 hours in reconnaissance. The building where Chloe was being held was a defunct textile warehouse surrounded by empty lots. 3 guards outside. Thermal imaging showed at least 2 more inside. Professional setup, but not impregnable. Frank positioned micro cameras around the perimeter and returned home before dawn. Diana's car was in the driveway, and lights showed under her bedroom door. She was probably reporting to Moscow, updating them on the operation's progress. At 7 a.m., she emerged from the bedroom, dressed for work. Sleep well? She asked with mock concern. Fine. I've made my decision. And I'll do what you want. But I want to see Chloe first. Proof of life. Diana nodded, producing her phone. The video showed Chloe in the same chair, but now she looked directly at the camera. Dad, I'm scared. Please just do what they want. But Frank heard something else in his daughter's voice, a subtle emphasis on certain words. Chloe was using a code he'd taught her years ago during what she thought were silly games. She was telling him she understood the situation and was ready to act when the time came. His daughter might have been reporting on him, but she hadn't been fully turned. There was still hope. The meet with Mitchell is set for 8 p.m., Frank said. Pier 7 at the marina. Good. And remember, one wrong move, one attempt to signal for help, and Chloe dies. After Diana left for her supposed job at a non-existent consulting firm, Frank began his preparation. This wouldn't just be a rescue mission. It would be the complete destruction of everyone who'd betrayed him. He started with Tony Vasquez. Chapter 5. The Hunt Begins. Frank had learned patience in the mountains of Afghanistan, but today it served him well in suburban Richmond. Tony Vasquez lived in a luxury apartment complex downtown, the kind of place that catered to young professionals with expensive tastes and flexible morals. Through careful surveillance, Frank mapped Tony's routine. The man was good, varied his routes, checked for tails, maintained operational security. But he had two weaknesses: an addiction to high-stakes poker games and a taste for expensive escorts. Every Tuesday, Tony visited a private game run by a man named Dmitry Volkov out of a penthouse in the financial district. Frank had encountered Volkov during his CIA years, a Russian national who laundered money for various intelligence services while maintaining the facade of a legitimate businessman. This Tuesday will be different. Frank positioned himself in the building's parking garage at 10 p.m., watching Tony's silver Porsche arrive. The Russian operative looked confident, carrying a briefcase full of what was probably agency money meant to fund their operation. Frank waited until Tony was in the elevator before making his move. He disabled the security cameras 20 minutes earlier using techniques learned at Langley, and the building's concierge was currently unconscious in a supply closet. The poker game was on the 15th floor. Frank took the stairs, arriving at the service entrance as Tony was settling in for what he thought would be a profitable evening. Through the kitchen service window, Frank could see 5 men around a green felt table: Tony, Volkov, and 3 others he didn't recognize. All armed, all dangerous, all focused on their cards and the substantial pile of cash in the center of the table. Frank had brought gifts for the occasion. The first flashbang grenade went off in the living room, followed immediately by 2 more in the kitchen and bedroom. In the chaos that followed, men shouting, furniture overturning, weapons being drawn blindly, Frank moved through the apartment like smoke. Tony was his primary target, but Frank couldn't leave witnesses. The other players learned too late that their Tuesday poker game had become their last game. When the smoke cleared, Frank stood over Tony's bleeding form. The Russian operative had taken a non-fatal shot to the shoulder and leg, careful placement that would keep him conscious and talking. "Where is my daughter?" Frank asked in fluent Russian, pressing the barrel of his Glock against Tony's kneecap. "Go to hell," Tony gasped. Frank pulled the trigger. Tony's scream echoed through the penthouse. "I have all night," Frank said conversationally. "And I learned interrogation techniques from people who made the KGB look like Sunday school teachers." "Where's Chloe?" It took 40 minutes, but Tony eventually gave up the location, confirming what Frank already knew, plus something more valuable: the full scope of the operation. Diana wasn't just eliminating Frank and compromising Operation Nightfall. She was the advanced scout for a larger SVR operation called Red Winter, designed to eliminate every burned Russian asset living in America while simultaneously destroying the CIA's counterintelligence capabilities. Frank was the proof of concept. If they could successfully eliminate a former CIA operative while compromising an active operation, they would roll out the strategy nationwide. Dozens of former Russian assets who defected would die, along with hundreds of American intelligence officers. Before leaving, Frank placed a small device in Tony's pocket, a tracker that would also serve another purpose when the time came. By midnight, he was positioned outside the warehouse where Chloe was being held. The thermal imaging showed the guards had relaxed their vigilance, probably assuming their boss was enjoying his poker game. Frank's assault began at 12:47 a.m. Chapter 6: Blood and Shadows. The warehouse erupted in controlled violence as Frank moved through it like a force of nature. 15 years of retirement hadn't dulled his skills, they'd refined them. Where younger operatives relied on speed and aggression, Frank used precision and patience. The first guard died without knowing Frank was there, a knife between his ribs, finding his heart. The second managed to turn before Frank's hands broke his neck. By the time the third guard realized something was wrong, Frank was already inside the building. 2 more guards waited in the main floor, but they were watching the wrong directions. Frank had entered through the loading dock, using shadows and industrial equipment as cover. The first went down to a silenced pistol shot, the second to a garrote that Frank had carried since his agency days. Chloe was being held in a basement office, and Frank could hear voices as he approached. His daughter was talking to someone, not pleading or crying, but carrying on what sounded like a normal conversation. Through a crack in the door, Frank saw something that made his blood freeze. Chloe sat unrestrained in a chair across from a man Frank didn't recognize. But what stopped him was the tone of their conversation. Familiar, comfortable, like old friends catching up. Thinks he's so smart, Chloe was saying. But he's been predictable his whole life. Mom figured out his patterns years ago. The man chuckled. And you're sure he'll come for you? Of course. He's sentimental about family. It's his biggest weakness. Frank felt something cold settle in his chest. His daughter, his 15-year-old daughter, was discussing his weaknesses with his enemies. Not under duress, not to save her own life, but as a willing participant. When this is over, the man continued, you'll come with us to Moscow. Complete your training. Your mother says you have natural talent. I can't wait. This suburban life has been so boring. Frank had heard enough. He kicked in the door and put 2 bullets in the man's chest before he could draw his weapon. Chloe didn't scream or show surprise. She just sat there, watching her father with eyes that looked suddenly much older than 15. Hello, Dad, she said calmly. Hello, Chloe. Frank kept his gun trained on her. How long? Since I was 12. That's when Mom told me the truth about what we were doing here. Chloe stood slowly, hands visible. I've been learning Russian tradecraft surveillance techniques. I'm actually quite good at it. They're reporting on me, every detail, your habits, your reactions, your emotional triggers. You're very predictable, Dad. Mom always said that would be your downfall. Frank studied his daughter's face, looking for some sign of the little girl who used to fall asleep in his lap during movie nights. But that child was gone, replaced by something foreign and dangerous. The code you used in the video, he said. Chloe smiled. What code? I was just telling you to do what they wanted. Which, apparently, you haven't done. Frank's phone buzzed. A text from Diana. Tick-tock, honey. Mitchell is waiting at the pier. He looked at his daughter, this stranger wearing his child's face, and made a decision that would have destroyed the man he used to be. You're coming with me, he said. I don't think so. Chloe produced a small pistol from behind the chair. Mom taught me to always have a backup plan. The training was evident, proper grip, steady aim, finger on the trigger. But she made one mistake. She was standing too close. Frank moved faster than she could react, disarming her and securing her hands behind her back with zip ties. Chloe finally showed emotion, rage at being outmaneuvered. You can't stop this, she spat. Even if you kill Mom and Tony, there are others. Red Winter is already in motion. We'll see about that. Frank marched his daughter out of the warehouse, leaving behind 5 dead bodies and a burning building. He had one more stop to make before his meeting with Mitchell. Chapter 7. The Pier. Gregory Mitchell stood at the end of Pier 7, watching boats bob in the dark water of the James River. At 53, he looked every day of his age, gray hair, lined face, the weary bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years fighting shadows. He'd been Frank's handler during the worst years, the ones that ended in Tehran with 3 good agents dead and Frank Morrison disappearing into suburban anonymity. Now Frank was back, and Mitchell wasn't sure if that was good news or catastrophic. The sound of footsteps on wooden planks announced Frank's arrival. Mitchell turned, expecting to see his former agent alone. Instead, Frank approached with a teenage girl whose hands were zip-tied behind her back. Jesus, Frank, please tell me you didn't. My daughter, Frank said simply. 15 years old and already a fully trained SVR operative. They recruited her when she was 12. Mitchell stared at the girl. She looked like any suburban teenager, blonde hair, designer jeans, the kind of kid you'd see at a shopping mall. But her eyes held a coldness that Mitchell recognized from interrogation rooms in places that didn't officially exist. Where's Diana? Mitchell asked, still playing her role. She thinks I'm here to betray Operation Nightfall. Frank handed Mitchell a briefcase. This contains the virus they wanted me to plant in your network. I modified it slightly. Mitchell opened the case, revealing a sophisticated electronic device. Modified how? Instead of giving them access to your systems, it will feed them false information while tracking their entire network. Every SVR operative involved in Red Winter will be exposed. Red Winter? Frank quickly outlined what he'd learned from Tony and Chloe. By the time he finished, Mitchell's face had gone pale. Hundreds of assets, Mitchell whispered. They could roll up our entire Eastern European network. Not if we stop them tonight. Frank checked his watch. Diana expects me back in 2 hours. I need you to stage my death. Come again. Car bomb. Iranian terrorists. Make it convincing. Diana needs to believe she's won, so she'll make contact with her handlers. When she does, we follow the trail all the way to Moscow, if necessary. Mitchell looked at the teenage girl. What about her? Chloe is going to help us, Frank said. When his daughter started to protest, he continued, because the alternative is a federal prison for treason. She's 15, so she might get out when she's 40. Chloe's composure finally cracked. You wouldn't. Try me. Frank's voice carried the coldness that had once terrified enemies in a dozen countries. You helped plan my murder. You betrayed your own country. I don't care if you're my daughter. You're an enemy combatant now. Mitchell intervened. Frank, she's just a kid. She's a trained operative who's been gathering intelligence on American targets for 3 years. Frank turned back to Chloe. Here's the deal. You help us roll up Red Winter, and maybe, there's a path back to a normal life. You refuse, and you spend the rest of your youth in a federal facility. Chloe looked between her father and Mitchell, calculating odds. Finally, she nodded. Good. Here's what's going to happen. Chapter 8, The Trap. Diana Morrison sat in her BMW outside the Richmond Marina, watching emergency vehicles respond to the spectacular car explosion that had occurred 20 minutes earlier. The fireball had been visible from 2 miles away, exactly the kind of dramatic statement that Iranian terrorists favored. Her phone rang. Tony's number. It's done, came Tony's voice, slightly distorted by what sounded like pain medication. Motherfucker put up more of a fight than expected, but he's crispy now. Injuries? Diana asked, noting the strain in Tony's voice. Nothing serious. Had to get creative with the interrogation, but he gave us what we needed before the end. Diana smiled. And the device? Planted in Mitchell's network. We should have full access within the hour. Perfect. Phase 1 of Red Winter was complete. Meet me at the safe house, Diana said. We need to coordinate the next phase. She drove through Richmond's quiet streets, thinking about Moscow's reaction when they learned of the operation's success. The elimination of a former CIA operative, the compromise of an active counterintelligence operation, and the recruitment of valuable assets, all accomplished while maintaining perfect cover. The safe house was a colonial-style home in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place that attracted no attention. Diana parked in the attached garage and entered through the kitchen, expecting to find Tony waiting with champagne and congratulations. Instead, she found her husband sitting at the kitchen table, very much alive and pointing a gun at her chest. Hello, darling, Frank said calmly. We need to talk. Diana's hand moved toward her purse, but stopped when she saw Chloe emerge from the living room. Her daughter looked shaken but unharmed. Ow, Diana asked. Tony was very chatty once I explained the situation. Did you know he's allergic to most painkillers? Made the interrogation much more efficient. Diana processed this information quickly. If Frank had taken Tony, then the car explosion, the phone call, all of it was theater. Which meant, Operation Nightfall isn't compromised, she said. On the contrary, it's working exactly as intended. We've been tracking your communications for the past 6 hours. Every SVR operative involved in Red Winter is now known to us. Diana looked at her daughter. Chloe, I'm sorry, Mom. He made me choose. The betrayal cut deep, but Diana was a professional first and a mother second. She'd made similar choices during her own career. Still, it stung. So what now? Diana asked. You turn me over to the FBI? Life in prison for your devoted wife. Actually, I have something else in mind. Frank stood, keeping the gun trained on her. You're going to contact your handlers and tell them Red Winter is proceeding on schedule. Then you're going to help us feed them false information that will lead to the complete destruction of SVR operations on the East Coast. And if I refuse? Frank's expression didn't change. Then you die. Here. Tonight. And your body disappears into the James River. Diana studied her husband's face and saw no mercy there. The mild-mannered accountant was gone, replaced by the predator she'd always known lurked beneath the surface. You're bluffing. You wouldn't kill your own wife. Frank's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled coldly. Tony Vasquez was found dead in his apartment 20 minutes ago. Apparent heart attack brought on by severe trauma. Very sad. Diana felt ice form in her stomach. Frank had executed Tony in cold blood, made it look natural. The man she'd lived with for 12 years was capable of casual murder. "What about Chloe?" she asked. "Chloe is going to help clean up the mess you've made. Her cooperation will determine whether she has a future in this country or spends her adult life in a federal facility." Diana looked at her daughter again. Chloe had chosen survival over loyalty, exactly what Diana herself would have done. Perhaps there was hope for the girl after all. "I'll need guarantees," Diana said. "Immunity, protection, relocation." "You'll get exactly what you've earned," Frank interrupted. "Nothing more." Diana weighed her options. Cooperation might mean life in witness protection. Refusal meant death. The choice was obvious. "What do you need me to do?" Chapter 9. The Shadow's Justice. 6 months later, Frank Morrison sat in a coffee shop in Vienna, Austria, watching snow fall on cobblestone streets. The Vienna Cafe was a hub for intelligence professionals from every major service. The kind of place where enemies bought each other drinks while planning mutual destruction. Operation Red Winter had been a complete success from the SVR's perspective, right up until the moment it wasn't. Diana had played her role perfectly, feeding Moscow intelligence that led them to expand the operation prematurely. 17 SVR operatives had been arrested across 6 states. 3 safe houses had been compromised. Most importantly, the Russians had revealed their entire network of burned American assets, former CIA, NSA, and military personnel who'd been living quiet lives until Moscow decided they were too dangerous to leave alive. All of them were now under federal protection. All of them owed their lives to Frank's betrayal of his own family. Gregory Mitchell approached Frank's table, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the weight of a successful but morally complex operation. "She's asking to see you again," Mitchell said, settling into the opposite chair. "And my answer remains the same." Diana Morrison was currently in federal custody, awaiting trial for espionage. Her cooperation had been valuable, but Frank had no interest in seeing her again. The woman he'd married had never existed. She'd been a carefully constructed fiction designed to exploit his loneliness and trauma. "What about Chloe?" Frank sipped his coffee, thinking about his daughter. Chloe was also in federal custody, but her age and cooperation had earned her a different fate. Instead of prison, she was being offered a chance at redemption through service. A carefully supervised career with American intelligence, using her training to serve the country she'd betrayed. "She made her choice," Frank said finally. "Actions have consequences." "She was a child, Frank, manipulated by people she trusted. She was 15 when she started reporting on me, old enough to understand the consequences of betrayal." Frank met Mitchell's eyes. "I don't forgive traitors, Greg. Not even my own daughter." Mitchell nodded, understanding. He'd seen Frank make similar decisions during their years together, cutting away anyone who posed a threat, regardless of personal relationships. It was what made Frank effective and what made him dangerous. "The agency wants you back," Mitchell said. "Full reinstatement, desk job, good pension. I'm retired. You saved hundreds of lives. You stopped a major intelligence disaster. That deserves recognition." Frank smiled grimly. "I prevented my own murder and eliminated people who betrayed me. Everything else was just good citizenship." Mitchell left 20 minutes later, carrying Frank's final refusal to return to CIA service. Frank remained at his table, watching the snow and thinking Diana would spend the rest of her life in prison, assuming she lived that long. Intelligence officers who betrayed their services rarely died of old age, even in federal custody. Chloe would serve her country for the next 20 years, if she was lucky. If she wasn't, she'd make a mistake and end up like her mother. Frank suspected it would be the latter. The girl had too much of Diana's calculating coldness to ever be truly trustworthy. Tony Vasquez was dead, killed in what appeared to be a heart attack, but was actually the result of a small device Frank had placed in his pocket. The device had delivered a precisely calibrated electrical shock 12 hours after activation, long enough for Frank to be elsewhere when Tony died. 17 other SVR operatives were either dead or imprisoned. Their networks had been rolled up, their assets exposed, their operations terminated. Frank Morrison, the Shadow, had won completely. As evening fell over Vienna, Frank paid his bill and walked out into the snow. Tomorrow he would fly to Thailand, then to New Zealand, finally settling somewhere warm and anonymous. He had enough money to disappear permanently and enough skills to stay dead. Behind him, he left the wreckage of a marriage built on lies, a daughter trained to betray her own family, and an intelligence operation that had consumed dozens of lives. He felt no guilt about any of it. In Frank's world, there were only two types of people: those who could be trusted and those who deserved exactly what they got. His family had chosen their side. He had chosen his. The shadow walked into the falling snow and disappeared, leaving behind only the memory of what happened to people who betrayed Frank Morrison. The mild-mannered accountant was gone forever. In his place walked a ghost who would never again make the mistake of trusting anyone with his life. Some people deserve forgiveness. His family had not been among them. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think?